Thank you so much for being here. Particular thanks to all of the members of the Dominican Sponsored Ministries in Higher Education, those who have come from a distance. I am so grateful, even though the pressure's on. And I want to give a special shout out, as students would say, to my brother in Dominic, the president of Albertus Magnus College, Mark Camille. Would you stand so we can... Mark, Becky, Jen, and I, along with a number of other presidents of Dominican-sponsored institutions, made a Dominican pilgrimage to southern France for a week last year, just this month last year, and it was truly transformative. When Sister Diane asked me to give this talk, and she said, I'd like the topic to be truth in the marketplace, I couldn't refuse. For one thing, I had 8 years of Catholic grade school education, and you just didn't say no to Sister. And Sister Diane in particular is very persuasive. Secondly, the topic that she mentioned just really resonated with me. Truth, marketplace. And I asked her, I said, Sister Diane, why did you think of me for that topic? And she said, well, because you've had this background of business as well as education. And I thought, okay, well, that's good. But the more I reflected on it, I realized that those two concepts going together have been a driving force for most of my life, even since I was a child. And so the ongoing debate in higher education about are we a true liberal arts college if we have career-oriented programs has never made sense to me. And one of the things I have been so excited about at Ohio Dominican University is that we have a faculty, staff, sisters, and culture generally that totally embraces the Catholic Dominican intellectual tradition and totally sees that tradition as being extremely relevant to helping students succeed in today's world. Obvious to me, but somehow it's not obvious out there, and you still get all of these conversations about a dichotomy between the ivory tower and the real world. Isn't this real? What could be more real than trying to figure out how to live and live well? So I thought, yeah, I'll do this. And then Sister Diane said, I need something to follow a colon. I said, excuse me? And she said, the title needs to have, truth in the marketplace, colon. So I put my marketing hat on, and I'm a classicist, and I needed something with alliteration. And I said, how about Socrates, from Socrates to social media? And she said, oh, that sounds good. So that's what we put on there. So this is not explicitly about what Socrates said, but it is about his spirit and his approach to seeking truth. And it's not going to be very much about social media, except for me at some point to tell you why I am not active on Twitter. Even though I think it's important for the university to be active on Twitter and social media. Jen and I constantly talk about this. She thinks I need to be active on Twitter. And we'll leave that to one side if we have time. But I thought I would start. I wanted this conversation. I want to be more of a conversation. This is going to be much less erudite than my bio would seem to think I am. And as I listened to that, I thought, did my mother write that? And I'm grateful for all of the opportunities I've had. But I think what I've experienced at Ohio Dominican and among the Dominican sisters themselves is that it's much more important to be real than to be learned. It's much more important to be personal than to be erudite. And those aren't necessarily opposed to each other. But if I'm going to err in one way or another, I'm not going to try to impress you with my knowledge, except to quote one of my heroes, Socrates, which is, as you saw on the slide, I don't have anything that I can teach you, but I hope I can encourage all of us to think a little differently. So just a few slides. This is a bust of Socrates from the Louvre. He was generally thought of as two qualities that were ascribed to him in antiquity were that he was ugly and that he was very, very high intellect. I'm not so sure that's ugly. It's just, it's Socrates. And there are two other busts next to his in the Louvre, and together they are sort of the holy trinity of Greek philosophy. And we have Socrates on the far right, we have Plato on the far left, and we have Aristotle in the center. They just happen to be placed there. Those aren't political labels. I have to make that clear these days, unfortunately. And what I want to share with you first is a personal story about how I got interested in all of this to begin with. I did have to take Latin and Greek in high school, although I didn't have to, but I wanted to. It was part of the program at Fordham Preparatory School in New York. But I had become interested in Greek philosophy since I was 9 years old. When I was 9 years old, there were two momentous events in my life that have really shaped the rest of my life and my view of truth and the marketplace. The biggest single event when I was 9 years old was that my parents, who were children of Italian immigrants, finally had accumulated enough money to buy their own home. So we moved from a rental apartment to a home in the Bronx. But it wasn't just a home. It wasn't like on a street with trees and shade and eaves and picket fence. It was on a busy street. It was not only a home, but it was a business. My mother was a hairdresser, and she was now able to own her own business, a hairdressing salon. And above the hairdressing salon was a 6-room apartment where we lived. My parents, 3 of my brothers, and me. 6 human beings in 6 rooms above the beauty parlor. My oldest brother had already left the house to join the Navy. And so when he came home on leave, he had to sleep on the couch. Those were the days when children did not have their own rooms, and a lot of children today whose parents can't afford to have their own rooms don't have their own rooms. So I have always appreciated students and children who have relatively constrained circumstances. But it was a wonderful experience, and so for me, that was where I learned how to be a person, how to have values, what the importance of being sincere and truthful. And yet, it wasn't apart from the marketplace, it was in the marketplace. It was a busy street. In addition to the beauty parlor, there was, just on our block alone, there was a dry cleaners, there was a grocery store, there was a pizza shop, hooray, there was a bakery, there was a hardware store, which eventually my father became the manager of. We were all very proud of that. And there was a florist. And that was just one block. And then, of course, businesses across the street and on adjoining streets, lots of traffic, lots of hubbub. And so when I started to become aware of ancient Greece and the idea that Socrates was not off in some ivory tower, he was in the marketplace amid the hubbub, it just resonated. Here's the marketplace of Athens, where all these folks interacted. That's what it looks like today, just ruins, with the temple of Hephaestus in the distance, the god of the forge, the patron of workers. And there have been a number of attempts to recreate the marketplace called the Agora of Athens. And through the middle was a race course. There were races, foot races. The foot race was the kind of quintessential athletic event for the ancient Greeks. And you have to sort of imagine these buildings and the center part of it all kind of filled with people selling their stuff. And this is another kind of modern rendering of what it might have been like. Just a lot of hustle and bustle. And that was sort of how I grew up. And it's in that context, imagine this guy walking around asking people questions. That's what Socrates did. He just asked questions, particularly questions of definition and meaning and clarity and probing. And he made a lot of people upset. As Peter Kreeft, who is a prominent philosopher, once said, Socrates was not an offensive person, but he offended a lot of people because he had no problem just asking people directly about their supposed expertise and asking probing questions that revealed that they weren't as expert as they thought. And nobody likes to have that pointed out. And so over time, he alienated enough people, and he also asked questions about the traditional Athenian gods. He asked enough probing questions that made people think, this person is subversive. He's undermining our youth. He doesn't believe in the traditional gods of the city. He has to be eliminated. So he was tried for undermining the youth, for corrupting the youth, and for atheism, and he was convicted. How many of you have read The Apology of Socrates? You must add it to your list. You must. And anybody who would like is welcome to stop by my office anytime and borrow any of my classics books. And I probably will let you keep them. The Apology of Socrates is Socrates' defense that Plato, who was his student, put in his mouth. That's why Sister Diane said, we don't know exactly what Socrates said, just as we don't know exactly what Jesus said, but we have a pretty good idea because his disciples, if you will, wanted to carry on his legacy. And so Plato was, if you will, a disciple of Socrates, and Aristotle was a disciple of Plato. Another reason why I want to be more personal rather than erudite in this talk is that if I say anything too attemptedly erudite, my colleagues will point out my errors very quickly, I'm sure. We have incredible, I just love being at Ohio Dominican and talking to our colleagues, because I even said to Marlissa Stouffer last week, I can't believe I don't even have to pay tuition. I learned so much. So that was the first major event that changed my life when I was 9 years old. There was another, and that is that my parents moved to this very busy street. There was a second major event that happened when I was 9 years old, and it had to do with a book, a simple book. Never underestimate the power of a book. This is the book. It's the first volume of the Golden Book Encyclopedia. Anybody remember this who's over 100? Yes. Well, this was a gift. And every week, the supermarket would have the next installment. Each volume was one letter of the alphabet, so it went on for half a year. And the first volume was A, from Aardvark to Army. Well, contained in Aardvark to Army was Aristotle and Achilles. So at the age of 9, I was introduced to Aristotle and his friends, and Achilles and the Trojan War. May I read to you just a couple of paragraphs of Aristotle that grabbed me at 9 years old? When Aristotle was only 17, he went to Athens to study with Plato, a famous Greek philosopher. The word philosophy comes from the Greek words meaning love and wisdom. To the Greeks, studying philosophy meant studying what we now call science. It meant also studying government and ideas of right and wrong. Aristotle stayed in Athens for 20 years. Besides studying with Plato, he did a great deal of writing. He and Plato were good friends, although they did not always agree. After Plato died, King Philip asked Aristotle to go to Macedon to tutor his son. His son was Alexander, who became Alexander the Great. For 7 years, Aristotle was Alexander's tutor. He taught him all that he thought was best in the Greek way of living. Aristotle then went back to Athens. He started a school of philosophy there. Today, we know much more than Aristotle did about many things. We have gone far beyond him in science, for instance. But in all the centuries since Aristotle's time, people have learned little about ways of thinking that Aristotle did not know. Well, as a 9-year-old, I was hooked. And that was the beginning of a lifelong journey. And that, coupled with my experience of the beauty parlor, really shaped who I became. Because it wasn't just living above the beauty parlor that was so impactful. It wasn't just being in the marketplace. It was also being in the company of women. I've come to realize. My mother was a very wise woman. She was not educated. But she said things that only in retrospect I realize were very simple but very profound. She didn't want to call her beauty parlor a salon. She thought that was too uppity. So she came up with the title, the name Marie's Beauty Lounge. She wanted her customers to feel at home, relaxed, building community, having a cup of tea. And it was also good business, because not only did she get people who came in once a month for haircuts, she got an incredible clientele of women who came in every week, ostensibly because they wanted a touch-up or a hairstyling, but they just wanted to be there and experience community. And she had a way about her that I realize is the way I run the university. I'm sorry. First of all, she said, no matter what you're feeling, smile. Because if you keep smiling, you'll feel like smiling. And later, that was very, if you don't, when I was at Xavier, I had a professor who used to say, if you don't live the way you think, then you'll soon be thinking the way you live. So you have to kind of practice, and then it'll come. But she also had wonderful ways of dealing with difficult people. Not uncommonly, customers, particularly first-time customers, would come in with a photograph from a glamour magazine, and the customer would say, I would like you to help me look like this. And my mother would very gently smile, look at the paper, put it down and say, you know, madam, that is not you. You are you. That's somebody else. You are you. You are already beautiful. You are naturally beautiful. What we do here is help your natural beauty shine through. Just trust us. And invariably, Customers went away very, very happy. And I thought, later on, the more I thought, gee, that is truth. And I forget who is the poet, Jeremy, truth is beauty, beauty, truth, that is all you need to know. Who said? Keats. You know, truth, beauty, and that ultimately is what goodness is about. And it was only many years later that the theological idea of transcendentals, the interpenetration of truth, goodness, and beauty, all one, that became very real to me, and I realized that it all started then. And it's that kind of kitchen spirituality and kitchen philosophy that I sense at Ohio Dominican University, in addition to the very high-level research and erudition that obtains here. So with that, 4 o'clock already. I will talk fast because we want to finish by 4:20 to get the sisters over to your reception. Just quickly, I will fast forward to my professional experience in the marketplace. And there were a number of different product categories I've worked on in my life that I continue to kind of observe from a distance. Primarily cleaning products, not a lot of interest there, but I was into air fresheners for a while. And I was going to show you some commercials about Arm & Hammer baking soda. Does it really work? How many of you think it really works? Okay. How many of you have Arm & Hammer baking soda in your refrigerators right now? When was the last time you changed it? A few months ago. You think it's still working? Ask the chemist in the room. But it's benign. So, all right, it makes you feel good, right? It makes you feel reassured. So one of the biggest challenges in the marketplace, what is a market? It's about exchange. And it's not just exchanging stuff, it's just exchanging your experience of stuff. And if you're experiencing something positive, to what extent does it matter whether what you're actually buying is delivering that feeling, if you're really just buying the feeling? As a marketing professor at Wharton used to say, you're not really buying gasoline when you fill up your tank, you're buying the right to drive your car some more. Do you really know what's going in your tank? No, but you trust that it's gasoline. So when you buy something, how do you know you're getting what you pay for? Well, we generally don't quibble about it if we feel satisfied. But there's a limit between when feelings can really disrupt our sense of reality. And as Dr. Brian, is Brian here? Dr. Brian Bresong is in the back row. He gave this is kind of like a bookend. He was on the first panel defining truth as a correspondence between the mind and reality. Well, our feelings may or may not correspond. And if they don't, to what extent is that a problem? And to what extent can we live with that? Well, if it has to do with air fresheners, that's not so bad. But if it has to do with drugs, that's a different story. And I've been following the drug situation a lot because I actually, back in the 80s, when I was a very, very young junior executive, account supervisor in the advertising business, in addition to working on Procter & Gamble products, I also handled new business, and I worked with the Jewish Hospital of Cincinnati. That was the first ever campaign for a hospital in Cincinnati. That was the time when hospitals, drug companies, attorneys did not advertise. It was regarded as unseemly. But I remember the very first ad for a prescription drug, and I thought I would share that with you because 35 years later, advertising for prescription drugs is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. It's just 20 seconds, 22 seconds.
If you're one of the many people who take the prescription drug Motrin, you should ask your physician or pharmacist about Rufen. They will tell you that both Motrin 400 milligram tablets and Rufen 400 milligram tablets are different brand names for the same drug, ibuprofen. There is only one important difference. Rufen can cost you considerably less.
That was it. May of 1983. It caused a huge uproar. Advertising prescription drugs directly to consumers, bypassing physicians, the world will end. After a while, it was pulled, and all studies were done, and the FDA got involved, and eventually they established rules for drug advertising that were pretty strict until the 90s, and then they were loosened. And then actually, all hell did break loose. And we now have the situation that we have. And so I feel morally, ethically obliged as a public service announcement to share the following commercial with you, because Ohio Dominican University is a very active member of the Opioid Education Alliance.
We love this town. It's nice.
There's like a peace of mind. It's fine.
It just feels safe and secure being in denial.
Living in denial works for me.
All the families in denial, they feel the same as we do.
Opioids? Not in denial.
No.
It doesn't happen here.
No.
My daughter has good friends.
My boys would tell me anything.
Exactly.
No, our kids are way too busy.
They would never abuse opioids. He gets amazing grades. Welcome to denial.
Don't live in denial, Ohio. Talk to your kids about opioids.
So this is the kind of the worst thing that happens when feelings tend to get the better of facts. But what about something in the middle? What about when feelings get the better of facts? It doesn't necessarily have the same kind of impact, but it does seem kind of, not so good after all. I've seen this ad a number of times just in the past few months, and I wondered if you've seen it as well.
God's will for us has always been to be in health and to prosper. And He's using the miracle spring water to do just that.
Now, I sent for the miracle spring water, and I want to let you know that God gave me a $50,000 debt cancellation. I was delivered from all different type, high blood pressure, fibromyalgia, you name it, God delivered me from it. Get the spring water, it really works.
The doctors had given her up for dead, and her husband brought her the miracle spring water.
My husband brought the spring water up, and I drank it. And I'm speaking today. I had no speech, totally paralyzed, and now I'm testifying that through the miracle of God and your ministry.
Listen, she had no speech. She's speaking today. Let me send you your free packet of miracle spring water. It's absolutely free, no obligation. Take a moment to jot down the number on your screen and call now. I'll send you your miracle spring water absolutely free without any obligation. You're next in line for a miracle.
So what do you think? Should the government intervene in this? I'm just curious. See, I'd love to devolve into conversation, but just curious. How many of you think the government should put a stop to this? One. Yeah, it's not illegal. Because water doesn't harm anybody, and if this is making people feel good, that's okay, as far as the government is concerned. But it certainly gives religion a bad name. So we have our work cut out for us. So what can we do? We can double down, to use the current phrase, on what is important to us. The marketplace is an exchange. What are we willing to exchange for what? What in the Catholic intellectual tradition and in the Catholic faith tradition are we willing to exchange for what? I'd like to read a brief passage from a book by Bishop Fulton J. Sheen. And I specifically chose Bishop Sheen as a kind of homage to Professor Kate Riley, who has written a book about Bishop Sheen. She's an expert, did her dissertation, and she, at the end of this semester, is going to be retiring after 25 years of teaching at Ohio Dominican University. She's going to be retiring to her native home in Lockport, New York, and she also wrote a book about Lockport. This is from a book by Bishop Sheen called Go to Heaven, because he said we're so reflexively, it's easy to tell people we're angry with to go to hell. Why don't we choose to be kind and tell people to go to heaven? And he's got a lot of interesting things to say, but he has this to say about holiness or sanctity. Because in the end, the Catholic Dominican tradition is really preparing us all to be saints and to feel comfortable with that language. And I know we don't because we're humble, and that's why it's good language. Sanctity is not a question of relinquishing or abandoning or giving up something for Christ. It is a question of exchange. Sanctity, it's the marketplace. Sanctity is not giving up the world, it is exchanging the world. It is a continuation of that sublime transaction of the incarnation in which Christ said to man, "You give me your humanity, I will give you my divinity. You give me your time, I will give you my eternity. You give me your bonds, I will give you my omnipotence. You give me your slavery, I will give you my freedom. You give me your death, I will give you my life. You give me your nothingness, I will give you my all." And the consoling thought throughout this whole transforming process is that it does not require much time to make us saints. It requires only much love. How wonderful. But it seems too good to be true. How do we distinguish messages like that from messages from Reverend Popoff and the Miracle Spring Water? By the way, I have to confess, when I first saw that, I thought, St. Mary of the Springs, maybe we could cash in on it. How can we tell the difference? That is what being companions on the journey is all about. That is what it means to be true. That is the real importance of being true. It's very practical to be real, to be authentic. It's not just good marketing. It is what makes us who we are. So I thought I would conclude with another commercial for a beverage. It's from Argentina. The commercial's from Argentina, and it's in Spanish. And if your Spanish is rusty, there are subtitles, so kind of look closely. But it really, you can see why I resonated with this, given my experience of the beauty parlor, the beauty lounge. And the commercial ad people, by the way, give names to commercials. They don't just call them by the product, because you have a lot of different commercials for the product. You label each different spot. And this spot is called The Brutal Truth of Love.
Mariana.
Sí, la rubia de tus sueños, Mariana. La rubia de tus sueños, Mariana, con estos ojos azules impresionantes. Porque son marrones. La rubia de tus sueños, Mariana, con este lunarcito más lindo que el de Cindy Crawford. Pero que no existe. Y además, decís? ¿Querés seguir con esta relación?
Natural is what suits you best. So may all your exchanges be moments of truth, of peace, and of love. Thank you.